Hey, what's up? We're up to video 6 in a 10 video series on how to create a language, and culture is a huge part of making a language feel lived in and realistic and truly part of your fantasy world or whatever book you're writing where you say, I need a con language. So, in this lesson, we are going to focus on how to ultimately weave that language into the natural elements of your world's culture and how to look at it with an open mind on what would help it become real and truthful. Because language is not just a means of communication; it's a living reflection on society, on their values, on the norms of existence, and of course, the history of life. Okay, so how does culture shape language? We're going to add some depth to your con because by incorporating elements such as idioms or taboo words, formal or informal speech, etc., we'll add nuance, cultural, specific nuance, and it makes it feel truthful to your world. But Thomas, why does cultural matter in language? Well, every language is shaped by the culture and the history that has built its existence. The words people use, the way they speak, the accents, etc., and the rules they follow all reflect their environment, their social structure, and the values that have led them to where they are today. So, by tying your language to the culture of your fictional world, you are ultimately creating a richer and more diverse truth to the world existing and its building. So, here's some key elements of cultural integration in the language. First and foremost, idioms and expressions. All right. Cocaine is a hell of a drug. All right. Is an example. Idioms are phrases with meanings that aren't directly derived from the literal words. They often arise from shared cultural experiences and reflect the world of the speaker. I'm Rick James, bitch. Another example. In English, break the ice means to initiate conversation in a tense or awkward situation. No one is literally breaking ice with some hammers or waiting for a lake to freeze over so they can be like, so when you think of your world, think of the power of an idiom or an expression where it's natural to your world, and you don't necessarily always have to explain it. You just have to show it in process. For example, if break the ice was from your world and it was the first time a reader was ever seeing the phrase break the ice, you might have a character say, uh, uh they would be nervous, and their friend is like, no, just go over there. And then they're like, I don't know if I can. It's like, look, all you gotta do is break the ice, and then you'll be able to get in there. And they're like, all right, so I just go over there and talk to them. Yeah, why don't you just, all you gotta do is initiate that conversation and you'll be in. And then they go over and they talk and they go, oh, there you go, he finally broke the ice, right? And that basically explains it without explaining it, because you're showing it evolved through behavior. And that's the power of true integration when it comes to storytelling. You know, when you're building your narrative and letting the story unfold through the characters' emotional experiences and choices. This is real seeding at its finest, is allowing it to be shown through behavior instead of going, all right, listen, we have a king, and a king, just so everyone knows, a king is someone who rules a regional area, most likely also known as a kingdom, which is the outstretch of what land they own. And before we go any further with this narrative, I need you to understand that they aren't necessarily elected. Kings usually gain money from the land they have. People pay a tax, and then in return, they protect them, etc., etc. All right, everyone understand? All right. So anyway, the king, right? We don't have to do that with new phrases and terminologies or idioms or expressions. You allow them to play out naturally and give your audience a little bit of faith in being able to understand what they're talking about. All right, next, taboo words and concepts. All right. Uh, so every culture in the world has words or topics that are considered taboo. things that are avoided in polite conversation or that carry strong emotional weight. For example, in our culture, it's taboo to talk about politics, finances, and religion around a mixed table or even at the dinner table itself. I know I grew up in a time, being 46 now at the time. Well, at the time of recording this video, I'm 46. At the time of its release, I'll be older. Um, because everything's pre-recorded at around the table, we didn't really discuss finances or how money works. It wasn't really a topic. However, because my family was a very my mom was very religious, she would talk about religion. Okay, but if somebody was over the house, they wouldn't talk about religion. If somebody started talking about money, it would become uncomfortable. If somebody started talking about politics, that was a whole thing, right? So it's a taboo subject. And what that means is when you're writing your fantasy world or your world in general, when you're building your world, think about topics that are off the table. What makes people uncomfortable? Because that creates a connection to the society itself and not just, hey, we're just trying to get through this plot. Because a plot is never interesting. No one cares that Thomas needs to meet Sarah. They care about how they're meeting each other, why they're meeting each other, what's keeping them from meeting each other or working out. Story, right? Because every narrative is made of a plot and story. Plot is what needs to happen no matter what. And story is how it unfolds through the emotional experiences and choices of the character. And the story is what's interesting. So when it comes to taboo language, words or concepts, idioms, expressions, that's all part of the story. It's allowing it to unfold through the natural occurrences of existence. Whereas plot is just, you know, it comes down to this must happen. Thomas must meet Sarah. Thomas enters a deli. Sarah is sitting down. Thomas comes over and says hi. Sarah says, "What's up?" Boom. That's all plot. There's nothing interesting about that. There's no challenging. There's no positions. There's no behavior. There's no emotional truth. There's nothing, right? So you have to look at your narrative with the idea of what is the depth, what has created this moment, right? For example, growing up in New York, first on Long Island and then in Brooklyn, and of course I lived in Florida. I lived in a couple of places, right? So you had to say to yourself, what would New York look like or Long Island look like? All right, 30 years ago, 40 years ago. And even just that amount of time has changed the cultural representation of our experiences, the words we use, even right now in our time. People are literally arguing about what is a woman, right? But in reality, words are ever evolving. Does changing the word woman change biology? Maybe, who knows? But that would has evolved because when we were first created as people, not created, but when we first started talking to one another as a living entity, no one in the world knew what the word biology even was because it wasn't even a study. It wasn't a terminology. Biology in itself is also a fake word. It's made up. Just like the sun, right? Saul. The sun's name is Saul, but we all call it sun. However, that's all. Both of those are fake. they they're not real. They were just made up. Uh, as much as every word in existence, including Italiano, is not a real language. We made it into a language. We've agreed with the functionality of it, and we have accepted it as a society. But in 50, 100, 1,000 years, Italian might vanish, just like Italian didn't really exist in the Roman era. It was Latin and mixture of all the regional languages, etc. Same as the U.S. of the United States. If we went back to the signing of the Declaration, okay, we wouldn't understand each other. Our words would be completely different. So, but what they talked about during the signing of the Declaration and what we talk about today, there are different kind of taboos. And that is the power of history and world and culture and creation. And it Just those little things, and you don't even have to dive into them as the narrative topic, but they add so much to your world because it becomes truthful. All right. Remember, language by itself isn't, oh, look, they have a new fancy word. You want words that have depth and purpose and interest, okay? Formal and informal speech. So there is a different way one might talk to, say, again, I've talked about this in other videos, where when you first meet a king, you say, your my majesty, your majesty. And then after that, sire, sire, right? If you meet a lord, it's my lord, right? But if when I was taking martial arts, it was my sensei, right? Uh, m- if I'm talking to a doctor, I say doctor, right? There is a formal and informal way of speech, and there are terms. And by the way, you don't have to have kings and queens, czars, or anything. You just can literally make up words. You can make up titles. I have a Naramor, which is the leader of the barbarian tribal, a barbarian plainsman, and it's a new word. It's just made up. It's about somebody, but what a Naramore is in my fantasy world is different than what a leader or a chief or a whatever in our world is. A Naramore has very specific responsibilities that expand what we may know, and it's my job to take that new word and the formality of and create a truth to it. Um, so in our world, we might say with respect, hey, I don't really like what you're doing. Say that with respect, right? In my world, with like the Naradita, they'll say of respect, of respect, and then they might say that they might speak freely, or they'll speak freely and then say of respect. And that's an example of being formal or informal, or an idiom, or whatever the case may be. It's creating a cultural truth. All right. It's important. Important. All right. Social structure. The structure of a society is often reflected in its language. So there is a hierarchy, there are group identities. you know, uh, Titles, right? So the social structure and the language, those titles. Again, Naramore, there are kings, there are czars, whatever the case may be. You could have a plum plum, oh, he or she is the mighty plum plum, whatever. I have Ru, which is basically a spiritual leader, but not necessarily like a healer or anything. They are just the spiritual guide. Um, they're the heart and the wisdom, right? And every Naramore needs one, right? As much as every Vru needs a Naramore. However, a Vru is not dedicated to a woman, and a Naramore is not dedicated to a man. Anyone could be either one of those, but they both need to lead a community. However, the Naramore is in charge, but the Vru's word is very powerful. So those are things that not only allow me to create new words, but now there's depth and definition to those words. There's responsibility and behavior to those words, specifically to titles. And I don't explain that. And you shouldn't explain yours either. But you need to show who they are through behavior so those words now have substance, right? Because just calling someone the leader or a Naramore, if you're like, oh, he's the Naramore, he's the leader, he has all these responsibilities, that's not interesting. That's just plot. That's exposition. All right. So anyway. All right. Now your job with any final thoughts. Your job with any creative element to your narratives is always about thinking of the bigger picture. Not that it has to affect the world per se, but to allow your world building to feel lived in. Language is one of those connectors. If language is being created just to be words, it won't carry the same weight. And again, not that it has to. You could write whatever you want. You could do. You're creative. It's you do what you want. but bring truth to those words, and now they become a part of the story. If that makes sense, you know. So when you're creating words or phrases, or even or a language itself, the way you weave it through the dialogue, or you weave it through even the plot, that will create the story. It'll create movement and truth. And readers will really appreciate it, because they're going to see something without having to be explained. They'll witness things happening honestly and truthfully. Even if you watch like something like Game of Thrones or read the books, right? There's a lot going on in there where they talk about stuff, and R.R. Martin, he does his fair share of explaining. However, like in the first chapter, Bran, there's a moment where the Night Watch is mentioned, and they don't necessarily explain what Night Watch is or who they are, but they do connect them to the people who just got found right before, spoiler alert, their heads are going to be cut off, and they broke their vow. So all right, there's a vow involved with the Night Watch. We seeded that information, and then slowly but surely we learn through Rob what Night Watchmen are. The Night Watch is because he is not only choosing to take the black. We're going to see it play out, and we get to see it, or it's shown to us, and all the new terms that are involved, because that is a title, Night Watch, right? Okay, get to the wall. The wall to us, oh, it's a wall, but to them, the wall is a wall, right? But we, again, that's the power of words. Every time you come a word, as simple as taking a word we know, wall, and connecting it to a culture, to a history, to an existence, to a responsibility. And now the wall becomes even more powerful in the context of Game of Thrones. All right. So again, language becomes lived, alive, and a part of the world's movement when you put time into how it is influenced by not only the culture, but the history and the ever growing truth of the world, how we influence it. In fact, in real time, you could start creating a new phrase, a new idiom, a new method, a new terminology, a new existence, right? All this can happen in real time. And you don't have to do all of this right now. You could allow the process to sort of be generalized and then build on it as you're writing your novel. Now, this is stuff that, you know, come up, while we're dealing with the writing itself. And that is the brilliant part about being an author, is we don't always have to come up with every single answer before we start writing out the words. You can discover, right? Even when you outline, you're still discovering. You're discovering where it's going with the outline. And then once you start writing, you start realizing there's alterations. So it's the same thing with your language. Find a baseline or foundation and then play with it. It will ever be evolving. Okay. And as things come up, give yourself a chance to think of something to replace or identify something. I've talked about this a couple times in this series. We all say hello, but do your people say hello? Or do they say, praise be with you? Right? Sabe, the god, the dragon king, praise be to he, the dragon king, right? Praise be. So if Sabe is basically the king of the gods in my world, and he's like one of the he's probably the most worshipped god, even though I have hundreds of gods. Uh, if somebody says the name Sabe, worshippers of Sabe will repeat, "Oh, praise be to he, Sabe, the Dragon King," right? And that is something that happens. But you can say hello to people that way too. You could say, "Oh, praise be to he," and then they would say, "Sabe, the Dragon King," right? And that's like saying hello to a fellow worshiper of Sabe. Praise be to he. But my point is, as things come up, take the time to think, are they just saying hello? What are greetings? Do I need a lot of greetings? Maybe not, but maybe how about regional greetings? So whenever they're in this region, it's a very specific greeting. Whenever they go to this region, it's a different greeting. Well, what happens if one regional greeting goes into another region, and they say again, "Praise be to you," right? And they're just like, "Good to the morn of yourself, kind person," right? And it's just you have that funny moment where they're like, "That's not what we say over here," because again, you do have. It's like going down south, when I'm like, "Hey, can I get a meatball parmesan hero?" And they're like, "A what?" A meatball parmesan hero. And they're like, "You mean a hoagie?" No, I mean a hero. I want a hero. Down, 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 down. Get me. Okay. Um. So that's something you could think of. Even goodbyes. If somebody's praying, how do they pray? How do they start? Right. Like, for example, Catholics, they have the rosary, and they hold the rosary, and there's a certain way they do it, and they do their opening, right? Have you ever gone to a Catholic funeral? Everybody in the church will say the same thing, as I walk through the shadow of death, right? As I walk through what is it? As I walk through the plains of the shadow of death. Anyway, I'm not a practicing Catholic. My mom was though, and then she became a born again Christian. My dad was a Catholic though. He used to say the funniest thing. He goes, "I don't care what you believe in, as long as you believe Jesus is your savior." He was joking. Like, my father had really funny. He had like my kind of sense of humor. I have his sense of humor for sure. But he was like, "Look, I don't care if whatever you believe. You can do whatever you want, but as long as you believe Jesus is your savior, you could believe in who you could be a Muslim. I don't care." But he was saying it, because he was funny. He's a funny guy. He was very funny. I miss my papa. Anyway, so that's all I have to say with the final thoughts. With that said, next video in the series we'll go the evolution and history, making language feel ancient. All right, giving language levels and complications. We'll explore basically how your language has a sense of age and developed over time, so it doesn't feel just like sort of babyish and new. Question: as always, is this video series helping you develop your fantasy language? Let me know in the comments below. What is it that you're not learning in the series up to this point? That's very helpful because I will be making a second 10 video series on creating a language that is connected to this. Remember, this is the foundational series that's explaining basically the structural element of language, and then we're going to be playing a little bit more in the second season. However, if there are things that you would like to have learned or would like more clarity on, let me know in the comments below, and I will happily add that to the list. All right. If you haven't done so already, please subscribe and hit the bell icon so you don't miss out. And as always, keep developing the right mindset. I'll see you next time. Bye.